One of the oldest debates in strength conditioning is around using machines versus free weights when it comes to strength, hypertrophy, and sports performance. I'm going to take you through a pragmatic approach to this debate, cover both sides of it, so you know exactly if, what, when, and why you should use machines or free weights within your training. And before I dive into that, Andrew and Usher and I have started a pre-sale this week for a brand new strength conditioning course for combat athletes. I don't have a better name yet, but the goal is to bring you in at the cheapest price it's going to be and have you help us guide the course so we can make it as practical and useful for you as possible. We already have an outline on what we want to cover. I'm going to cover all of the strength and power programming principles and science. Andrew is going to cover everything related to conditioning for combat sports and underpin his sprint interval and conditioning research so you can be ahead of the game. And I'm telling you now, this information is not available anywhere because it's literally brand new, done from Andrew's research. It'll give you a leg up over your opponents. So make sure you go down. It'll be the first pinned comment. It'll also be down in the description. We're pre-selling this. It is the lowest price it will ever be, and you'll be able to help guide the course so you can get the most out of your strength conditioning for combat sports. Now, to fully dissolve this argument around machines and free weights, we need to look at it from two different approaches. And many coaches have these philosophies on varying ends of the spectrum. And I like to look at the spectrum for strength training as these two ends. One is the more purely mechanical approach, and one is the more purely coordinative approach. These two approaches tend to oppose each other in philosophy, and I'll run through them very quickly, and they tend to sit on the opposite end of each spectrum. Now, most coaches sit somewhere in the middle and are doing a bit of both, but there are many coaches as well that sit purely on the mechanical end of this, which is essentially just improving outputs, whether that's a muscle's ability to generate force, a muscle's ability to generate force faster. And then the coordinative approach underpins that movements need to have better transfer or be a little more closely aligned to the sporting movements. Now, my opinion is that strength conditioning for combat sports should sit somewhere in the middle. It doesn't have to be directly in the middle, but it shouldn't be on either end. So to define each, the mechanical approach, as I mentioned, is just about outputs. How can we train a muscle or the body to produce more force, be faster, be more powerful, regardless of the movements we're choosing, because all we're trying to do is improve the mechanical abilities of the muscle. This means I could be doing something as simple as a leg extension to improve the abilities of the quads to improve force. Because everything is seen in the weight room as general to the sport itself, that we're improving force capabilities of that muscle group that will likely transfer to when we're doing our sport. Now, the coordinative approach understands that every movement has some kind of sequence, some kind of rhythm, some kind of timing. Sport is about fluidity, relaxation, and being able to move in a coordinated fashion, depending on the movement you're doing. It realizes that just because you squat more, bench more, leg press, whatever it is, that you're potentially not gonna see all of that transfer to the sporting movements, such as being able to punch harder, kick harder, or throw harder. So I wanna start with the mechanical approach. And this will kind of be a little bit of a blend of both as I go through these, but I want to go through some of the research of machines versus free weights and what we see as outcomes through training studies. So we're looking at 6 to 12 weeks of machine-based only or free weight-based only training, and then seeing pre and post test if strength, size, and sports performance improves similar, or if there are differences between the two groups. So I've got my notes here in front of me. I'm just gonna run through these, but if we go to the year 2020, we have Schwanbeck and his colleagues, and they found no differences in strength or size after 8 weeks of machine only or free weights only training. And they used tests that were machine and free weight tests. So it's important when we look at the research that the tests aren't just one or the other, because strength is a skill. So if the test is only free weights, for example, you can likely expect that the free weight group is more likely to improve the free weight test because they're practicing that movement throughout the training study, whereas the other group isn't. So it's just an important distinction to have in this research. Then we have Aaron Hoots and DeHont in 2020, and they had similar findings in novice trainees, so basically untrained individuals, where they had similar strength gains after 10 weeks for machine and free weight training. We also have Pareto Gonzalez and Sedlacek, I'm butchering some of these names, forgive me, but in 2021, and again, they support these findings with similar improvements in jump performance. So now we're looking at more than just strength and size. So similar improvements in jump performance and strength between free weights and machine-based training. And then we have a new meta-analysis. So meta-analysis sums the totality of the research within this free weights versus machine-based training. And this was done by Hagen, again, I'm saying that wrong, and his colleagues in 2023, and they found there's no difference in strength, hypertrophy, or jump performance between free weights or machine-based training. So if we would look at training purely as a general training modality for sports performance, with the sole goal of maximizing outputs, the evidence suggests that using machines or free weights, it doesn't matter. The goal is just to improve the ability to produce force and produce force quickly. How you do that does not matter in this instance. But if we're coming from a purely coordinative approach background, a machine-based training program probably isn't the best option. Since every movement has some kind of sequence, some kind of rhythm and timing, that means some exercises might be better suited for combat athletes over others. For example, potentially becoming stronger or faster during a heavy prowler push could potentially transfer better, especially for, say, wrestlers and grapplers who are always going forward and are shooting shots in that forward direction. Maybe more beneficial, may have better transfer than taking your squat from 400 to 500 pounds, as an example. The sequencing and timing of throwing a medicine ball might be better than a Smith machine bench throw where you're fixed on a machine and throwing, because of the sequencing and timing you need to go from your feet to your hands to get the maximum distance of that medicine ball. It's often why too much pure heavy strength training may become problematic for sports performance, as it creates a stiffening of the entire body to be able to move heavy loads. Now, I'm not saying all heavy lifting is going to make you stiff and slow, but doing too much volume and too much of this without much of anything else can lead you down that road. And that's regardless of free weights or machines. However, here's how I see machines being useful for combat athletes. The first one is being easily accessible for performing eccentric overload style training. Now, when we're talking eccentric overload, we're talking using loads greater than your concentric 1RM. So if you can squat 400 pounds, you need to load more than 400 pounds on the bar to be able to get an eccentric overload, since we are stronger eccentrically than concentrically. It means that we have to use things like weight releases, where you're hanging weights off the barbell to increase the load, and then you're having to squat down with this load. Now, one of the issues is you're increasing your risk of injury. You have to be very well trained to do it, and you need extra equipment to do it. That's not to say you don't need extra equipment for machines, but you get my point there. If you're not well trained, you're probably not going to use those methods anyway, but someone who's intermediately trained can still do eccentric overload on machine-based movements and reap the benefits from that. We use eccentric overload training because we can increase muscle fascicle length through adding blocks of muscle fibers in a row. And from that, we can improve contractile velocity of the muscle so we can produce force faster, but we can also shift the length tension relationship up and to the right, producing more torque or rotational force at longer muscle lengths, helping reduce the risk of injury. So it's worth doing. Things like 2 up, 1 down on a machine is far easier to do and far more safe than doing eccentric overload 110% 1RM back squats with weight releases. That's not to say you shouldn't do it, can't do it, but machine-based training makes that so much easier. As I mentioned, 2 up, 1 down lying leg curl, 2 up, 1 down leg press, 2 up, 1 down leg extension. These are all options to overload those muscles eccentrically. And when I talk about 2 up, 1 down, I'm talking about 2 legs up and then lowering with 1 leg. Then we're using loads that you cannot lift concentrically with 1 leg, so we have to use both legs to get it up. The other reason is to work around injuries and mobility restrictions. If you can't squat, don't try and force yourself to squat. If you've got lower back problems, whatever it is, you don't need to do those movements. You don't have to do any movement in your training. There's no rule that says you must squat, bench, and deadlift. If the leg press causes you no pain, you can do it safely, you feel good doing it, you don't get any niggles afterwards, use the leg press instead of squatting. The goal with these exercises is to improve the mechanical outputs from lifting, so we can ideally transfer those to sports performance. Now, if we take a more coordinative approach as well, we can do our jumps, our plyos, our throws. Then we start getting a more comprehensive training program than just lifting. Again, we're not looking at things in isolation. We're not just doing machines, not just doing free weights, not just doing XYZ. We're doing everything together so we can maximize transfer from the gym to our combat sport. And finally, you can use machines, even if you don't have any of these problems, as your maximum strength stimulus, or even if you're trying to add muscle mass and size, you can use machines in place of some of these. What if you don't want a barbell bench press for whatever reason? You can use a chest press machine, incline bench machine, any pressing machine instead of performing the incline bench or bench press, especially if the barbell causes you shoulder problems. Now, my personal bias is not avoiding machines, but limiting their use for free weight movements. So that's not because of quote unquote stabilizer muscles or anything to do with that argument. But more so what I like, Zach Evanish coined as in-between muscles, and the awkward lifting you can get into with sandbags, stones, and even more traditional lifts like push presses. Train these muscles that you're not going to get while sitting on a machine. And being in some of these awkward positions or positions where you have to really support load, in my opinion, is very beneficial for combat athletes who are having to do the same. Further, if you train from home out of your garage gym, which a lot of people are doing now, you're probably not going to have access to machines, so you need to make the most out of your free weight training. So if you're wondering if you can use machines versus free weights, yes, go ahead, use the machines. But try not to make it your entire training program, which you're probably not doing anyway, and start to look at things as a broader concept instead of just in isolation. But if you like this video, make sure to subscribe and check out the pre-sale link for the course down below. It is the cheapest it will ever be, and you can help guide the course as it's created to give you the most benefit for your combat sports performance.